Good Sunday morning, everybody. Welcome to the Lions Grid. My name is Kevin Marheine. I am joined today again by Mr. Joseph Wilmot. Joe, thanks for hopping on the show. It's week 8 in the NFL. We're talking about the Miami Dolphins, who will be heading to Ford Field today to take on the Detroit Lions. And Joe, we were talking a little bit before the show got started, but if you're a Lions fan, the season hasn't been going great so far. 1-5 coming into this game. Just curious, Joe, about what your sort of thoughts are about where the Lions are currently, and if you think this is something they can turn around this season, or do you think it's something where they are better off going for their a higher draft pick in next year? If it's better to look forward to next year as opposed to hoping something good can happen here this year.
I've never been one to tell somebody to get the higher draft pick. I don't. I believe in the philosophy of playing the best football game by all means necessary. Play clean football. Don't get penalties. Play disciplined football. Saying that they've won one game this season and they've lost the rest is not what you're looking for in Coach Dan Campbell's second year. You wanted a winning record at 9-8, or compete in the division. Green Bay's doing bad. The Lions are doing even worse. The division's up for Chicago or Minnesota, and typically we don't see Bay run the table. But I don't want them to pack it in already and say, "Oh, the season's over with." I want them to play for their love of the game and the Detroit Lion. After all, in the NFL, maybe the lion is the king of the jungle. Unless you run into a hippopotamus, I have a link on that on my Facebook, but that's a whole different territory. That's being in the water. And actually, this week they're going to Miami. They're playing the Dolphins, and Dolphins are friendly and very positive creatures. So we'll have to see how they Swift coming back. And Ross St. Brown another week healed up, and optimism going into this game because they played fairly well defensively against they couldn't get the offense to get in rhythm. So hopefully some of these they'll be able to play better football.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Joe. I think if you look at earlier this season, I think they had lost their first couple of games there by less than a touchdown each. But these last 2 weeks in particular against New England and last week, they've been outscored 53-6. So they haven't scored a touchdown in the last 2 weeks. They went from being, I think, the number one offense in the NFL to not scoring a touchdown in 2 weeks. And, if they can get things turned around back here at home, their last 2 games have been away games, which may have contributed to those offensive woes. But as you pointed out, they get back Swift and Amon-Ra St. Brown this week. You hope that getting those 2 big weapons back, that they'll be able to break this touchdown drought and at least get into the end zone once here this week against the Dolphins. I think you also brought up a great point there that I think makes this season kind of particularly painful is that, the NFC North isn't as strong as it has been in previous seasons. You mentioned the Packers are not playing the greatest. They lost to the Commanders, who the Lions beat earlier this season. The Bears have found a way to win some close games against some good teams, but they haven't necessarily asserted themselves. So right now, the Vikings are kind of the de facto kings of the North. And it certainly, I think that, it makes it feel like a missed opportunity that this was certainly, I think, a year that coming into it, with everything, all the momentum with Hard Knocks and everything else, where people thought that this could be a real year for the Lions to go from first to worst in the NFC North. and it seems like a missed opportunity, which hurts even more, right? It's because especially when you're seeing teams like the New York Jets and the New York Giants, potentially even the Atlanta Falcons, be going from first or from last to first in their own divisions. You think there'd be a chance for the Lions to do that, given the surroundings and the positive momentum we had coming into the season, but it just hasn't really translated that into results, which is discouraging. But I think um, I sort of mentioned earlier in the season when they were closer games and that offensive for the Lions was clicking. It was certainly, even though a lot of those games did end in losses, of course, the only win coming against the Commanders. At least they were entertaining games to watch, right? Like, yes, I would love to see the Lions win every week, but if they're gonna lose, I'd like to see the games being entertaining at least. Like if you're gonna lose, at least make it fun for the fans to watch. But when you're getting beat down 53-6 in the last 2 weeks, that's hard to watch. That's hard football to consume. So hopefully here today against the Dolphins, I could totally see this being a game given how fast the Miami Dolphins offense plays with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. This could be a real shootout here in Detroit in the 1 o'clock hour slot. So if you're a fantasy football owner, I think this should be a game where people should be interested because I'm expecting a whole lot of offense and not a whole lot of defense in this one.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill, and with the return of DeAndre Swift, and I think Tua has another week in frame from concussion, probably wearing the red vest or something, so he's not getting. Um, I really think that this game, if they can put up some offense, nobody likes seeing field goals. We didn't come to watch free kick field goals. We didn't come to be disappointed in our initial starter of the season and have him miss field goals. So like if he would have made his field goals, we would have won that game against Minnesota. And he had to pick somebody else up. And last week he did convert on 2 field, but we didn't come to watch football players kick field goals. We wanted.
Yeah, and even with that field goal game too, I think another big point of that is if you saw the Michigan State game last night, Michigan had no problem trotting their kicking team out there and converting, getting those field goals because they felt real confident in Jake Mooney and their kicking team to do it. Whereas Michigan State and Mel Tucker, you saw them be forced to go for it on a lot of fourth downs instead of sending their kicker out there because they weren't confident in his abilities to get 3 points for the team. So, in previous weeks here against New England and last week, you saw there were some times where I think Dan Campbell elected to go for it on fourth down as opposed to sending the kicking team out there because he didn't have faith in his field goal kicker. So, this is Mike Badgley's second week kicking for the Lions. You mentioned last week he did knock down some kicks for the team. So hopefully that gives them a little bit of confidence because, the game last night for Michigan State didn't go well. And I think part of that was because in times where they could have potentially put 3 points on the board, they went for it on fourth down because they didn't have that sort of confidence in their kicking game, and it just it wasn't necessarily the entire reason they lost the game. There were a lot of things that happened in that game, but it certainly contributed to it because there were drives for them that ended in no points, whereas Michigan had, I think, at one point, I'm not sure how many field goals Jake Mooney finished with, but he was 5 for 5 at one point. So being able to have 15 points on the board just from your kicking game, could be make a huge difference in the game as opposed to ending a drive with 0. So, hopefully, I think Michigan State fans and Lions fans can both sort of have that joint misery in the fact that our kicking games aren't the greatest and that special teams have been a little bit of a given us some heartburn here lately. But hopefully we can see the Lions. Since Mike Badgley did have a good performance in his first outing for the team, hopefully they can feel a little bit more confident and not always have to feel like they have to go for it on fourth and short and feel like they can rely on that part of the team to execute when needed. because when you don't have that to count on, I think it certainly puts a lot of pressure on the offense, and potentially to the defense too, with turning the ball over on down so many times. Uh, Joe, another thing that I wanted to get your opinion on, we talked about how this could potentially be a little bit of a shootout. And I think a big part of that, again, we talked about Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, the rest of the talented position players that the Dolphins have. One of the weaknesses and one of the more injured areas for the Lions now, with some of the skill players coming back on offense, is the secondary for the defense. I really think Jeff Okudah has been he struggled a little bit in the game against Seattle where he was up against DK Metcalf. And, DK Metcalf is a super big receiver. He's also, I would put Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle is like the top tier for speed, but I would still have DK Metcalf in that tier just below them, though, in that speed chart. So he's super big, super athletic, and super quick. This week, Jeff Okudah is likely going to be going up seeing a lot of Tyreek Hill, who is, I think, faster than DK Metcalf. And with Jeff Okudah being our best DB and just the secondary being beat up in general, I think that's something I'm a little bit concerned about heading into this game, is the Lions secondary. And hopefully what we'll see is the Lions defensive front, that pass rush with Aiden Hutchinson, Frank Kaminsky up there, helping him get a little more pressure on the QB, because I think our secondary is going to need it, because like I said, the only receiver that Okudah really struggled against was Metcalf, who's got a lot of speed. And I think he's going to see plenty of that today as the Lions square off with the Dolphins.
Yeah, when you look at covering matchups against like receivers like DK Metcalf, Hill, or Calvin Johnson, you look at the to outmatch the opponent, and what you want to do is you want those situations. If you play zone and you play team zone, means covering a certain area of the field that locks it up instead of one-on-one, mano-a-mano. You have to play team football. Today was the Lions playing team football. So often we see players. Matthew Stafford was more of a team player. He distributed the ball offense, but like on defense, when we had Ndamukong Suh, when we had others that were like stars of the Detroit Lions, more often than we focus on the team. If we were to the team, everybody their moment of spotlight in May 2004 Detroit Pistons, where the starting five was the best, were a group. They were the best starting five. If we can get the best starting 11 on defense, that plays fundamentally sound football, competitive, instead of trying to like promote the DeAndre Swift, the Amon Hutchinson, I think Jeff Okudah are a good tandem at cornerback. I think they're really good at two, and then to back them up, they have Mike Hughes and Will Harris. Good cornerback duo or trio or whatever. And I literally sound team football would go a lot further than having shine and outshine the other players on offense and defense, because when you generally you want to stand out, so you're like, the number on the Lions, like when Barry Sanders here, it was Barry Sanders. When Calvin Johnson. When Night Train Lane was here, it was Night Train Lane. When Bobby Lane was here, it was Bobby Lane, and about one player, but he was still more of a team player because they won championships behind him. And then he put the curse on the Lions. Mm-hmm. But I think the only way that you're going to find out, as Dan Campbell is getting this team to play team-oriented football, to win more games than they won last year. There's still plenty of time. than half the season left. I think it's what is it, week 8 right now?
Yep, we're heading into week 8 today. Yep.
Yeah, week 8. So they have week 8 and they have next week, and then after next week, it's going to be the halfway point of the every game, every week after that, they have games to play. They've already done their bye, so games of the season yet, and and we're kind of just saying, oh, the Lions are not going to win any more games. I think if they an end of the season like they did last year during midseason or late, we could see them win a lot more football games and still be potentially fun to watch this season.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's still plenty of games left, and you look, they still have to play the Bears twice. They have to play the Panthers. They have to play the Packers twice. And usually, you would consider those to be those Packers games. You think best case scenario that hey, you might be able to split 1-1 with them, with both teams taking the home games because the Lions do traditionally struggle at Lambeau Field. But that's most years. This year has proven that the Packers team. There's no guarantee that they're going to be able to come out and win games on Sundays like they have in season past. You would have definitely last year would have thought that the Packers could have walked in against Washington last week and gotten a victory, and they lost that game. So there's plenty of time, I think, to change the overall record and sort of perception of this team. And I think you had Sheila Ford Ham come out earlier this week and sort of speak to that. Right, she feels like she has the right guys in place with Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes and their respective coaching staff, and thinks that the right people are in place, and that it's just going to take some patience. She had talked. They had asked, I guess, questions were asked about, but what about like the Giants and the Jets who have been able to turn things around so much quicker? She mentioned that, yeah, those were sort of uh, those were turnaround projects, but what's going on in Detroit is more of a complete teardown. It's been building back up from the very foundations to try and get this team back. So, I think a big part of those flips where teams go from worst to first in their division, there's definitely some luck involved in it. Unfortunately for the Lions, I think if you look, certainly during my lifespan or our lifespan, Joe, we haven't really seen the Lions have a whole lot of luck. You wouldn't describe them as being a lucky franchise. Um, and so, I think they are doing things between Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell to get this team so that they can be more competitive down the road. And they mentioned when they took sort of this regime came in that this was going to be at least a 3-year process. And so we're in year 2. Obviously, we'd want to see the record show improvement from last season, but we have seen some improvement from some players. Jeff Okuda being one of those guys who is seemingly to have gotten better than he was last season. So that's encouraging. There are some encouraging green shoots sprouting off of the tree, but yeah, I think really uh, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. As we talk about them having plenty of time to improve their record, Joe, I guess it's time we talk about who we think is going to win today's game. I think we've been in lockstep for most weeks. We both have been picking the Lions during the game previews. But this week, I've been listening to Mike Valeni on the ticket, and he has had like a feeling that the Dolphins are going to lose this game. I don't know if I agree with that. I look at the Dolphins, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. I think Tua being another game removed from the concussion protocol. I'm going with the Dolphins in this one. And it's one of those things where I think the Lions could. I can see a path to victory for them, but I'm going to go with the better's advantage. The 3.5. Well, I guess they're actually favored by 3.5 points. I'm going to go with the betters and go with the Dolphins in this one to win against the Lions. But Joe, who do you have in this matchup?
what you say about Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell is, I think culture, it's going to take some time, and you got to get players to buy in. And I think but as with anything, it usually gets worse before it gets better. We saw hope at the end of the last season with the wins, and we came star-studded hard knocks, and then we had disappointment. Season or late season, more often or not mid-season, which goes to my picking the Detroit Lions to win the football game, is growth, is potentially culture more so mid-season now rather than late season like we did last. My hope, it's what I come to believe, because teams in Detroit are getting more recognition, and I think they're on the rise. Like the Red Wings are playing. They're still only one game, but they got an exciting young players. And the Detroit Tigers, that they have players that play at their position all throughout the season, but they just never click and getting it off. But I'm picking the Detroit Lions in this football game. I think they're going to put up some defense. I think it's going to be much like the football we saw at the beginning of the year, a competitive football game, but I think the Lions pull it out in the end.
Fantastic. Well, I think there's one last thing we need to talk about before we sign off for today. And really to help them look like that football team that they were at the beginning of the season. We haven't talked about Jared Goff yet. I think he's going to be a key, obviously getting DeAndre Swift back, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are helping him get back some of the weapons that helped him be successful at the beginning of the season. But I think another big change that's happened in the last couple of weeks has been just turnovers on his part and not being as careful with the football. I think this is going to be an important game for the Lions. We were sort of talking I know you had been messaging in chat, and I talked about it in last week's post-game episode about whether or not we felt Jared Goff was the QB moving forward for the Lions. As we mentioned, there's still a lot of weeks left to go in this season. If you look at just the New England and the Cowboys game, I think clearly if you just take those two games, you certainly would expect the Lions to move on from Jared Goff at the end of the season. But there are also the games at the beginning of the season where he helped lead the Lions to the number one offense in the league when everyone was healthy. So you have that block of games where he looked really good. You've had the last two games where he struggled with turnovers and decision making and hasn't looked great. And then we have another 11 games left in the season. So I think, Joe, for your point for the Lions to get the win today and look like that offense that we saw at the beginning of the season, I think a lot of that's going to come down to what Jared Goff can do and making smart decisions with the football. But what is your sort of opinion right now on Jared Goff? And do you think he is someone that the Lions are going to need to look to replace at the end of the season? Or do you think he's someone who could potentially be that game manager and allow the Lions to spend most of their attention on acquiring more pieces on the defense to make that unit better as we head into 2023?
Well, I don't know what his contract is. I think he's got one more year left on his contract. I think that a lot of his struggles the last couple weeks has been because he's injured. At the beginning of the season, he had and DeAndre Swift, and a couple weeks his best receiver has been Craig Reynolds, and DJ Chalk and Amman, and I just see him struggling with all. Granted, he's got one of the best offensive lines, but when you're handing it off to your third string and throwing it to a third string wide receiver, it's against starters, number ones in the league. And you're going up against the Dallas Cowboys, who just got Dak Prescott back, and both those teams are, not the New England Patriots, but New England has won 9. So I mean, I think that he's still in an evaluation period. He's going to be in an evaluation period for the rest of the season, and until the season's up, they look at the stats, they look at the amount of wins, they look at the. He hasn't been Stafford for us, you know, and Stafford this season. But when Stafford was here, you know, he'd have late fourth quarter comebacks. He'd put up the scores. You know, he'd throw one interception, two TDs, three TDs, yards. You know, standard stat pad Stafford. You know, I still think Jared Goff is an evaluation period. He doesn't seem to me to be that Stafford was, or a star that Stafford was. Jared Goff being elite level quarterback, you know, for his career. What you want is an elite quarterback. So if they choose to depart from him, having Lamar Jackson and making this team a lot more exciting.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting prospect of excuse me, bringing in a veteran quarterback like Lamar Jackson, who the Ravens have yet to extend his contract. Um, could be something exciting to look forward to, and certainly if you bring him in free agency, would certainly allow you then to spend the rest of your draft capital on improving the defense. So could be something interesting, something we can speculate to about as we get into the off season. But as we've pointed out, still 11 games to go before that off season comes. So I think today should be a good day, um, especially with Swift and Amon-Ra St. Brown coming back to do some of that evaluation about Jared Goff. You know, we mentioned the last 2 weeks have been kind of rough, but we'll see what sort of bounce back he can have today at home against the Dolphins. That'll do it for today's episode of the Lions Grid. Joe, thank you for joining us. Appreciate having you here. For everybody who's watching, you know, thank you for tuning in. Of course, you can find the Lions Grid on YouTube, Facebook Live, Twitter, and Twitch. We're also broadcasting on the JCHW broadcasting channels on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well. So whether you're looking for JCH Broadcasting or the Lions Grid, make sure you check out our channels, give them a like, and you'll be able to keep up with all of the latest episodes of the Lions Grids as they come live. Next week is going to be kind of an interesting episode because I'm going to be in India for a wedding. So we'll see about how that gets executed. It might not be during the same time, but we'll get that sort of figured out once I get acclimated to the time zones there. But should at least be able to hop on and do a quick episode there, and it'll be the first ever international episode of the Lions Grid. So looking forward to that. And then, of course, we'll be doing a show tomorrow evening, just doing a recap of a reaction to what happens today as the Dolphins and the Lions go at it at Ford Field. So, Joe, any last words you want to leave the people with as we get ready to sign off for today?
I just think it's too early to give up on this regime of coaches and managers and what they got going on. It's a building process. You're changing calls, taking a long time, and it's not the results everybody wants. It's not the instant success, but without comes to be, you know, the way that we want it to be. Patience is a virtue.
That's right. You gotta hold on. It's still a very young season. I know it's felt rather long, but still 11 games to go. So we'll see how things shake out. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. I'm Kevin Marhini. He's Joseph Wilmot. We'll catch you during the next episode of the Lions Grid. Have a wonderful day.